Welcome back to the channel, you guys. It is Comic Kid here again, and today we are saying nice things about the ever so popular, critically renowned Daredevil 2003. Now, as always, some of the background info on this movie is that it's not really the most well-received comic book movie out there, especially given how far superhero cinema has come. And, you know, having just recently watched it, some questionable physics, poor CGI here and there, and plot points that really just kind of happen or don't make sense. Like, there are some good things to say about it, but it's easy to see how people didn't really end up liking it. And so, yeah. Now, as always, I'm not going to say too much bad about it. Most people know what's bad about it, and that's also not the point of the video. So we will go ahead and get started with the good, but again, before we do that, as always, be sure to hit like and subscribe, and be sure to check out the links in the description as well. Now, also I do want to mention that I watched the PG-13 version of the movie and not the director's cut. To this day, I still think that I have not seen the director's cut, and I know a lot of people say it's the better version of the film. It is rated R, and so it adds that like bit of darkness and graphicness to Daredevil that people usually associate with the character. But I could only find this PG-13 version on streaming, and so that's what I watched. But to go ahead and get started into the good things. Now, as always, in regards to the cast, these are some pretty top-notch actors. Say what you will about their performances in this movie, but I do think Ben Affleck is a really, really good actor. Aside from his role as Batman as well, I think he's proven himself in a number of roles, and you know, people like to point out The Town and Argo as his top two, and that's understandable, but Ben Affleck is not what went wrong with Daredevil by any means, and I know when he was first cast as Batman, a lot of people pointed to this movie, and I think that's totally unfair. I think Ben actually did a pretty alright job as Matt Murdock. Obviously, you know, he only had so much he could do with a script like this, and so I gotta give Ben props for probably being the strongest actor in this movie. As far as Jennifer Garner goes, you know, the two's personal relationship aside, I would not have picked her as Elektra myself. I don't have anything against Jennifer Garner, I just don't think this was a role for her. Which I'm sure a lot of people would probably agree with me there. Absolutely nothing against Jennifer Garner personally, but she was probably the weakest casting choice. Now, as far as Colin Farrell's Bullseye, everyone knows Colin Farrell is a phenomenal actor as well, and I don't think this version of Bullseye really worked for the overall point of the film. I never really thought that he was scary. He was just very goofy and stuff like that, had all these kind of like cheesy one-liners, which the film's cheesiness is another common critique against it. And so, again, nothing against Colin Farrell. He is a fantastic actor through and through, but I do think he was just as out of place in this role as Jennifer Garner's Elektra was. Now, I think one of the biggest points in wasted potential in regards to this film was Michael Clarke Duncan as Wilson Fisk. I honestly think if they had actually tried to develop him more, then he would have been a fantastic Kingpin. And everything about Michael Clarke Duncan just seems like he'd be perfect for the role, and I just think that if they had developed him and a bit more personality for him as well, I think he would arguably be better than Vincent D'Onofrio if given the right script. And so yeah, for all the faults that this movie has, I would not say that the cast is one of them. It's also kind of funny to see that, oh yeah, Kevin Feige is involved in this movie, which we all know everything he's done for the MCU. And even seeing Jon Favreau is happy, it's huh, look at that. So yeah, there are some strong points in this movie. But again, seeing Jon Favreau as Foggy is just pretty alright. Like, it's a fair role for Jon Favreau, I would say. It is surprising to see him in the movie as well, given everything he's done for the current MCU as well. And so, yeah, for all the big names that are in it, and even behind the scenes, I just think it's kind of funny to see how far these individuals have come. Now, as far as the soundtrack fits into this movie, moving on to that, rewatching this just kind of reminded me of exactly how emo I was in the early 2000s, because I just kind of knew every song in the film beyond just, Bring Me to Life by Evanescence, which it always is associated with. And so it was more cringe in that it reminded me of myself in this aspect than like cringe in the sense that an early 2000s action movie was. And so I do think the movie actually holds a bit of nostalgia, at least for me personally, that I kind of came to appreciate. Again, cringy in a whole different aspect, in like a almost comforting sort of cringe, if that makes sense. And so I'm sure anyone like older than me, or maybe even younger than me, would not have the same emotional response to this film in that regard. But as much as I feel like the soundtrack was out of place in this movie, I did find certain aspects of it to be rather comforting. Now, I do also want to mention that I do like this Daredevil suit. A lot of people kind of hate on it, and I do think the Charlie Cox one is better, don't get me wrong. But I didn't mind the leather stuff. I kind of, like, when I was reading comics at the time, like, that is kind of how I pictured Daredevil. And even in recent and modern comics, I almost kind of see it that way as well. For those of you who don't know, Sideshow, the toy company that makes a bunch of, like, 12-inch figures, 6 scale, their Daredevil that they did a few years back actually looks very close to the Ben Affleck one. Now, Sideshow's figure is based off the comic designs, but because those elements are so common in the comics, like the leather and some padding here and there are so common in the comics, it makes sense that they would feature that in film as well. And so as much hate as Ben Affleck's suit gets sometimes, that I think is just people adding hate onto the movie. I think the actual suit itself was fine. Could it have been better? Yes, absolutely. I do agree Charlie Cox's is better, but I don't dislike it by any means, and so yeah. Now, as far as the overall plot goes, it is kind of all over the place at times. It jumps around, certain things make perfect sense, and then other times characters just kind of show up out of nowhere. But I do think the film showed as good an understanding of the character as it did a misunderstanding of the character. There were actually times where I'm like, yes, this film gets Daredevil perfectly, and other times where I'm like, did they even read the comics? And so I just kind of think that's like more of a weird aspect to the film as well. Not necessarily a good or bad thing, but for as much as I feel like they misunderstood the character, I also feel like there were some good Matt Murdock moments in there, especially in the stuff with his dad. Now, there were some cringy moments with all the flashback stuff as well, but I actually really liked how they did the stuff with his dad. I actually thought the two's relationship was really well done, and yes, they changed his name from Battlin' Jack to the Devil and stuff like that, but like whatever. And so I thought that was actually a really strong point in the movie. And then, especially in the flashback sequences as well, they actually had some unique callbacks to some Daredevil creators, stuff that I didn't notice until I rewatched the movie. The night his dad dies, Jack is fighting John Romita, which I thought was like actually hilarious. And then the mob boss who approaches him mentions that Miller, Mack, and Bendis threw their fights with Jack because they were told to. And I was like, oh, look at that. Never would have caught that if I weren't paying attention. And so there are some pretty good Easter eggs throughout the movie as well. You can tell that they read the comics. It's like, okay, well, there are definitely things from this movie that are in this run or that. And that's almost why it's so frustrating, because it's like, yes, there are times when it understands the character incredibly well, and other times where it's like, who even is Daredevil? And I really feel like the biggest missed opportunity was with this kind of subplot they created where he's like, I'm not the bad guy. I feel like that really could have been an incredibly strong theme through the movie, but we do watch Matt murder a guy by like knocking him in front of a train, and then he nearly beats a guy to death in front of his kid, and so as dark as Daredevil can get sometimes, I think if they had wanted to do the I'm not the bad guy story or theme, they could have really done a better job there, and I feel like they knew they wanted to do it, but something didn't quite connect and it like misfired or whatever. And so I just feel like they just were so close to making that a great point in the movie, but whatever. As far as everything else goes, I do feel like my last point is that this movie at times really had some excellent cinematography. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously parts of it are super dated, but there are points where you really get like a noir sense of style, and especially the first shot where it kind of trucks right and then booms up and reveals Daredevil. I thought that was just wonderful in every way. Like, that opening shot just screamed Daredevil to me. And so yeah, there were plenty of other shots in the movie where I was like, this is actually very well composed. Like, I love this shot, I love the colors, this, that, the other. And so for as many good shots as there were, I felt like there were some bad CG moments. But credit where credit is due, there really were some fantastic visuals from time to time in this movie. But that is about everything that I have to say about this film. As always, let me know what you guys think of Daredevil 2003 down in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe as well, and I will see you guys again real soon.